No. Welcome back, everybody. Lynn and I have talked in the past about the huge importance of socializing horses and the impact on their training and their life and their well-being. And there's no smarter place to go, I think, than all the way back to where it starts when they're babies and weaning. So Lynn is going to lead us through a lively converse and I think very thought-provoking conversation about the lifelong impacts of the weaning process. So hi again, Lynn, and I'm going to hand the reins over to you
Okay.
metaphorically.
And do you have the title up there now?
Not yet. I
Let me
don't
share.
see I don't see the slides yet. Here we go. Sometimes it takes a second to think. Here we go. Yep, I see it.
Okay, we're good. Yeah, it's weaning might sound like something that is just important to people who breed, but in fact it's important to all of us because how and when a horse is weaned can have lifelong implications, much more than people usually realize. We want to have adult horses who are sound and reliable, but how and when they're weaned can really make all the difference. So I'm going to go through first the weaning process as nature intended, because I think that this is something that not everybody understands how it is supposed to work. The bond between a mare and foal has to be super powerful in order for the foal to survive. Otherwise, if the foal didn't get distressed at leaving the mare or missing her, or she didn't get distressed missing him, the foal would wander off, mare wouldn't care, and the species would be extinct. So early on, foals naturally stick really close to their mothers, and then they gradually widen their horizons and they go off exploring, they go off playing with playmates, and then sometimes mom will get out of sight and the foal gets scared, and then the stress hormones hit, mainly cortisol. And this is the emotion panic. Panic is defined as the fear of loss of a companion. It's not the common usage of extreme fears, specifically fear of loss. So the foal's distress cries bring mom back, bring her reassurance, and at the same time, the stress chemicals are overwhelmed and flooded. The foal's body is flooded with the feel-good chemicals, oxytocin, prolactin, and endorphin. This happens over and over again with increasing time and distance of separation. And at the same time, the family groups providing additional security because horses who are naturally kept live in family groups with multiple mares and their babies and the dad. And the whole group really socializes the youngsters and teaches them social skills and helps and reassures them. So the foal's normal development is supported physically, emotionally, and socially. He learns to self-regulate through these temporary separations and reunions, builds his confidence, independence, and really important resilience to stress.
Hmm.
Meanwhile, he's learning critical social skills as he develops bonds with his playmates and with other adults. So his brain is developing normally as nature intended. Around 8 to 12 months, the foal is physically and emotionally ready for weaning. He starts to nurse less, and the mare makes herself less available. And interestingly, it's often the foal who initiates and just decides, don't really need you so much more, mom. I'm busy playing with my friends, going exploring, eating grass, and whatever. And weaning occurs naturally, and there is no stress. Common domestic weaning practices are almost completely opposite. Up till about the 70s, the typical weaning age was 6 months, which wasn't ideal, but better than what's often done now. But then in the 70s, some research showed that mare's milk production decreases around the third or fourth month. It no longer meets the foal's nutritional needs. And guess what? We can grow foals bigger and faster if we feed them concentrates. And who needs mom anymore? But no consideration was given to the long-term consequences. of this, not physically, emotionally, socially, or behaviorally. So now the commonly recommended weaning age is 4 to 6 months. The foal is usually separated forcibly from the mother and placed either with other weanlings who are supposed to provide company or isolated in a stall. Stress is accepted as part of weaning. I could hardly find an article that didn't say stress is an inevitable part of weaning.
Yeah, that's wild. Can I interject? So, is it correct to assume that w we changed this weaning, we bumped it earlier because the thinking was, well, the milk production is declining, therefore nature must be telling us that yeah, the baby could be on its own doing its own thing at that time? Or, I mean, were there other economics involved or
Oh, that's let me come back to that in
okay,
just a minute,
okay.
because that's exactly where I'm going with this. And the term early weaning is really ambiguous. When is early? So I like to refer to either natural weaning, which is when the mother and baby are ready, or forced weaning when they are forcibly separated. And this may be more important than the actual age. So yeah, these are the commonly cited benefits of earlier weaning. The first is economic. We can sell the foals younger. Gee, we can sell this foal at 4 months old. Great, ready to go. Just feed them the concentrates. And now we can breed the mare back so we can optimize her reproductive efficiency. This is a term from article that's typically used in articles. And you have the faster growth that people thought was a good thing, like, oh, we'll get them grown up sooner, we can get them started sooner in training and started sooner working. Isn't this great? So again, this is what many articles have suggested. The weaning's nutritional intake can be managed better without maternal interference. And then supposedly the foal's attention can be transferred from the mare to the human, which is supposed to also enhance trainability. None of this, of course, supports health, welfare, or reliable behavior. So let's look at what really happens with forced weaning. When the foal's separated from the mother, he feels panic. That's that fear of loss and separation. And he cries and he cries. But unlike should be happening, mom doesn't come. He's flooded with stress chemicals and there's no relief. This ongoing stress shifts his body from growth mode to survival mode. This is nature's way of helping young animals survive. His normal brain development is disrupted because he's in survival mode, not growth mode, and his brain chemistry is altered, perhaps permanently. When the foal goes quiet, he has not gotten over it. This is another thing that nature tells young animals. If mom doesn't come when you cry, then be quiet. Don't attract predators. So this isn't saying he's gotten over it. It's saying that nature is telling him, just be quiet and hope for the best. And then what happens? He's not gotten over missing his mother. He is now in a state of grief. And grief is another piece of the emotion panic. They're intertwined. And grief is closely related to physical pain. So what this foal is feeling is grief, depression, and something like physical pain. He's learned that separation means terror and grief and no relief. This extended separation has sensitized the fear system, especially the fear of being alone. And here's what we have: grief, depression, hopelessness. This foal looks like she's about one step away from just getting ready to die. She is hardly ready to engage with people and start training, because any animal in that state of depression is not in a state to learn anything good. And the risks of early or forced weaning and high starch diets that go with it are numerous and well documented. I couldn't even begin to look at all of the studies that support the or describe the problems that come with this. And these repercussions can be lifelong. In fact, with trauma like that, I think we have to assume that the implications are long-term. So one of them, with a lowered stress tolerance and increased sensitivity to fear, is adult separation anxiety. Now, when I was a kid back in the 60s, I rode a lot of different horses, and I rode a lot of them alone. I never once rode a horse who had any problem with leaving the other horses and going anywhere I wanted to go alone. Some other people that I've talked to of my vintage report the same experience. Others ran into some separation anxiety, but a lot of people I talk to feel that the separation anxiety that people report now in horses is a lot more common than it was back then.
Well, that's so interesting, Lynn, because I was thinking that I like your word vintage. I guess we're different vintages, but
We are.
I was thinking a lot about that today because I do frequently encounter this level of rider stress about how do I get my horse to ride away from the barn or ride out in the field where it can't see its herd mates. And some of this is like chicken and egg. Some of this is it's easy for me to think, well, it's because the horse has led a sheltered life, it only is in the arena, it doesn't get out enough or whatnot. But I did start to think today about how commonly I encounter this situation where there is anxiety, there's a lot of drama around horses
Yeah.
leaving, or if you're on a trail ride and they see another horse up on a ridge line or something far away, and that just like unhinges them. Situations like that. And I was thinking about our conversation today, and I thought, "God, maybe this has more to do with weaning than I've thought about before."
This is not something that seems to be very well received in the horse world, but it's very clearly noted in other animals that that when they do not receive the maternal nurture that they need up to the appropriate age, that there are lifelong repercussions, and some of those repercussions have to do with things like they have to do with stress sensitivity, and with horses that certainly includes this fear of being alone. So in this horse in this picture here, there's an example. She has been mobilized by panic to run the fence line until her companion comes back because she cannot tolerate being alone. She has learned she learned too young that you can't trust that an absent companion is going to come back. And the part of the problem here, there's a lot of training suggestions for what to do with horses who have this separation anxiety. But I suspect that a lot of the difficulty in addressing it has to do with the fact that once the brain chemistry has been altered, we've got things that are, this is an issue that can be hardwired. This is not going to be as amenable to training. Certainly there's things we can do, but I think it's not totally a training issue. One of the other common results of domestic weaning is stereotypies. These are not seen in wild horses. They're not seen in naturally kept horses, but they show up. I had a hard time believing the 15% of horses, but I kept checking, and that seems to be widely accepted. So I think it depends a lot on the population. And if you have horses that are raised and handled under high stress, then you'll have a higher percentage of
Mm,
horses with stereotypies. The common ones are cribbing, weaving, and stall walking, and they usually start within a month of weaning.
mm.
They used to be called vices. You may remember that, Jack.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but they're not. They're coping mechanisms. They're self-reinforcing because they release the feel-good chemicals that the foal was desperate for when alone and in a state of panic. And the one that really surprised me was that concentrates increase the risk of cribbing by times. I saw two separate studies that came to the same conclusion, and they go back 30 years. Why do we have so many articles on why does my horse crib? Why does my horse crib?
Yeah.
We've got a pretty good answer right here. Wean them early and give them concentrates.
Mm.
Um, and I think the connection between those two things is still under study, but one hypothesis is that the concentrates create acidity in the young horse's gut, which is not mature enough to cope with them, and that sucking wind actually produces some alkaline saliva that brings them some relief.
Mhm.
So that may be the kind of connection there is between the cribbing and concentrates. And there's other well-documented risks. Stall-kept weanlings have lower bone density. Poorly socialized horses are more prone to aggression, and they're going to be poorly socialized if they've been stuck in a stall by themselves or turned out with a bunch of other weanlings. Um, a bunch of stressed out weanlings are not going to be very nurturing for each other. We also have compromised immune function, making them more vulnerable to respiratory and GI infections, compromised development of healthy gut microbiomes. Ulcers are common in weanlings. The percentage varies, but in one study in Scandinavia, the one I found where they checked the foals for ulcers before and after weaning. Prior to weaning, 20% of the foals had ulcers, which
Oh.
I thought was pretty horrible to start with.
Oh, yeah.
After weaning, 98% of the weanlings had ulcers.
Oh,
And of course, ulcers can have pretty severe complications.
yeah. Yeah.
So these high starch concentrates that are often given to weanlings contribute to too rapid growth and weight gain, metabolic issues, and osteochondritis dissecans, and commonly known as OCD. Uh, OCD is actually loose cartilage and or bone fragments in joints that can cause inflammation in the infected joints, and found in up to 50% of young horses. So, Jack, I think you have some experience and practical application
Um,
of.
yeah, I've worked myself with a few horses that had OCD. One was many, many years ago. So I don't know. Perhaps it was a genetic cause, but it did limit what this horse could do. It was a Lusitano stallion. It limited. He would have sort of an intermittent lameness, and they discovered OCD in his stifle, and they did do a procedure to try to fix things up a bit, but it was always a loose link, so to speak. But I am seeing, I'm at that time, that was the first horse I had encountered. It was a lot of years ago, but I had never encountered or heard of OCD in my years on the East Coast, in my growing up. But subsequently, I am hearing about it fairly routinely, and it is a little kind of like, what came first. But I am happy that you're shedding light on this because I think, our young horse practices are likely contributing to this. So I used to only encounter OCD in breeds that seemed to grow quickly and had big joints. So warm bloods and thoroughbreds. Now, you're kind of seeing it. There's no breed bias. It's kind of shown up in young horses. And in some horses, they have OCD, but it just sort of never presents a problem, unless you did some imaging and found the OCD in the joint. For some horses, it's there, but it's not a problem. But the question is why is it there? And certainly the high starch diets do seem to be, a lot of vets seem to think that's a major contributing factor. And there are ongoing studies as you're referencing here about the long-term metabolic consequences for these horses when they start on these high concentrated diets early. And I also want to make the point that, so we have a lot of young horses. I mean, compared to 20, 30 years ago, we have a lot of young horses with OCD, which not all horses, but in enough horses, it can cause lameness and swelling, and it's just generally a bummer, and it'd be great for them to not have it. Okay, so we have that, but then we also have, and I was thinking about this today in relation to this topic. I think I can speak to like urban horse keeping. So again, we come back to the economics. So when these young horses get weaned at 4 or 5 months, when you live in an urban area, as I do, and as a lot of people do, is big horse communities, Seattle, Denver, Austin, a lot of us are dealing with limited acreage. Then what happens is you end up with this young horse, baby horse, in many cases, not out in a pasture with buddies because that's not available. And I will tell you that when I've observed this, when I watch people paying board on a baby horse, that's on average $600 a month going out the door. There is this desire to start doing things with the horse earlier than you normally would, if you know what I mean. Like instead of
Yeah.
waiting till the horse is 4 or 5 years old to ride it, people start wanting to do something because you're paying a lot of money. You've got this horse standing around, they shouldn't be standing around. You start, you shouldn't be circling them repetitively, but people end up playing with them in the round pen a lot, doing things like this that further damage the joints. So, maybe there's already some OCD, and then we're further damaging the joints because we're kind of eager to do something, quote unquote, with this baby horse that really should be out, probably still with its mom, but out in the pasture. So I was just thinking about the economics of this a bit today in addition to not only selling these horses sooner, but human impatience taking over, maybe. What do you think about that?
I think that's a really good point that didn't hadn't immediately come to me because I'm lucky enough to live in a place where most of us have lots of pasture, and my horses have 5 acres to roam around. And but I think that's a really important point that you made. If you're paying board on a young horse, even if you've got your horse at home, you'll want to be doing something with them. And so
Mhm.
maybe part of the solution is for people to find to understand what is the appropriate exercise and appropriate interaction that we might have with a young horse that sets him up physically to do better, and then also emotionally to engage with people and to be happy in his work as he goes along. Um, because the hard work or inappropriate work, I think, is also one of the commonly recognized um, uh, risk factors for
Mm.
OCD.
Yeah, yeah.
But we can raise healthier horses with some basic management changes. And I do understand that everything that's recommended here is not possible for everybody. Not everybody has a pasture for horses to go out and play. But if we look at what is the ideal, then we can at least plan to make the best use of our resources, whatever resources we do have, and use the resources we do have maybe to compensate for what we don't have. So we've got little Tiger here. He's just a couple of days old and he's running around his mom, which is the typical thing for young foals to do. First gallop usually is a circle around mom. He's also had opportunities for exploring. So he's getting some normal development here. And he's also been lucky enough to have well socialized companions. There's two older geldings, and older geldings or a stallion are particularly helpful for colts because colts do look to older male horses as role models. So little Tiger had his two uncles here that he could run around and play with. And now here's Rambler, the foal, and he is observing what mom's eating. So he's doing what horses would do naturally. He's trying to eat the high forage diet that his mom's eating and getting accustomed to do this and learning to do that while he's still getting her milk.
Mhm.
At the same time, he's learning that people mean good things. So Rambler is the foal on the right in the picture that I'm in, and Shay is the foal on the left. She and her mother together have come over to see me because Shay is younger, shyer. Her mother's going to be more protective. And this is the best way to start engaging with a foal is along with mom. You introduce yourself to mom, mom decides you're okay, and the foal goes, oh, gee, I want some of those scratches too. Rambler on the right has come over without his mom because he's older and more confident. On the right, you can see Rambler getting a scratch. And you see the person has her arms all the way around his body, which for some foals would be scary because it's almost like feeling trapped. And yet, clearly, he does not feel trapped or distressed by this handling. He's having a grand old time, his nose in the air, telling us, like, yeah, these scratches feel really good. And so he comes over to people voluntarily because he's confident, he's engaged. This is a foal who's ready to learn. But what he needs to learn, and to your point earlier, Jack, he doesn't need to learn to be chased around a round pen. He needs to learn good manners and confidence in people that will set him up so that when it's time to be ridden or driven or whatever his job's going to be, he's going to be like, hey, whatever this person wants to do must be okay because everything people have done with me so far has been just okay. So you learn by watching. So instead of cutting the mother out of the training process, we can let her be a role model. Here, Rambler learned to lead by being led along with his mom. So did my bronze. And he's learning now, too, that being ridden is a normal part of life. And an interesting story about my bronze. When I got him, his breeder told me very proudly that you can clip bronze and he doesn't mind. And I didn't realize what a bonus that was until the first time he cut himself and the vet whipped out the clippers and Bronze didn't even bother to look twice. And in fact, clipping him was a dream because I ground tied him in the aisle and woke him up when I was done. The reason for that is that Bronze's first clipping was while he was still with his mom. Mom modeled, yeah, clippers are clippers. They're no big deal. They might tickle, but you just stand here and you get clipped and life's fine. And those first experiences, any one of those that can happen along with mom, is a huge confidence builder. And then when the foal and the mother are ready for weaning, then we leave the weanling with familiar companions. And this way he has the nurturing and reassurance of others. So to summarize, we have these options to the extent that your resources allow is maximize the turnout, provide companions, feed a high forage diet, not the concentrates, and they won't grow as fast. And that's good if they don't grow as fast. In fact, some of the foals that were considered underweight by some people, because we're trained to think of healthy horses as fat horses, some of the foals who were underweight were the healthiest. Introduce the foals to people and start training before weaning. And then leave the foal with familiar companions. So we have lots of benefits from this, but and people can read these on their own. But I'd like to tell the story of how Tiger, the little Dartmoor foal, how his weaning went to show that even domestically, it's possible to do weaning without stress. So Tiger grew up with with his companions, and when he was about 8 months old, he decided he wasn't that interested in nursing, and his mom just made herself a little less available. And Tiger did need to go to the equine hospital for castration because there was some potential for problems, which happily didn't materialize. So his person needed to complete the weaning and make sure that Tiger was going to be okay being separated from his mother and not even on the same farm. So she brought the mother over here with profuse apologies for how traumatized I was going to be by listening to this mare screaming and crying for her baby. And the mare got off the trailer here. She'd been here before. She got off the trailer. She looked around. She said, Oh, I know where my stall is. That's where my stall is. Yep, I know where you feed my hay. I know where the water is. Okay, Lynn, what's the plan for today? Not one scream. Meanwhile, back at the farm, Tiger went over to one of the other mares he knew and indicated he'd like to nurse. So she obligingly assumed the position. He checked. Oh, there's no milk there. Humph. Well, I guess I'll go play with the boys. And that was the end of weaning. There was no stress. So it can be done, but I think people have to change their view. And instead of accepting that weaning is something that we have to manage and that we have to accept that it's stressful, people need to take the view of it should not be stressful. Let's figure out how to do it without stress.
Yeah, gosh, I mean, this would be would be so lovely to see this. I was also thinking today of obviously this only applies to larger breeders, perhaps, but the prevalence of selling foals in vitro or sorry, in utero, like that for a breeder, if you've got a reputable stallion, I think is the desired model that you have this foal sold by the time they hit the ground. And sometimes there's a waiting
Oh,
list that you get these
yeah.
babies. And so certainly I'm assuming, I don't know for sure, but that would de-incentivize people to let this weaning process play out for as many months as it would need to maybe be totally stress free. But again, there's the economics of it. But I guess, as we wrap up, I do just really want to underscore. I've worked with horses that have some, separation anxiety to a high degree. And, we try all the things and consult other colleagues. And, to be honest, I feel like sometimes there's many of them that just make a tiny bit of headway, but not sizable headway. And I can't underscore enough how lovely it is to have a horse that's had a very, very unstressful early beginning and is well socialized. I mean, my own horse, I lucked into it, but my own horse is that way, and he's just delightful. There's no, I can ride him away from a herd. He can be in a herd working. He is so okay, around leaving other horses, and people really end up quite limited. And not to mention, it gets dangerous when horses have this level of kind of panic that's deep, deep in there if it's deriving from an early source like weaning. I've seen so many horses, hurt themselves to a big degree, throwing themselves against walls and impaling themselves and falling down. And then you've got massive vet bills and major injuries, and not to mention it just becomes very difficult and stressful for everybody involved to try to do many things with those horses, to trail ride or go to a new environment or all the things. So I think diving into a horse's early days, which can be tricky if you're buying a horse, on the internet, like many of us do, to find that backstory. But I guess those would be my closing words is to really put some thought into that early period, because I am increasingly changing my tune about these horses that have they really struggle in this social environment and have that panic when they leave the herd.
Yes, and I'm starting to hear from people that if they're buying young horses, they're looking into how and when the horse was weaned, and they're taking that into account, and they're passing up horses who were weaned younger, and they're willing to wait for horses who have been weaned more in a more healthy fashion. When we get adults, we usually don't know what happened, and we're
Mhm.
stuck with what we get. But even understanding the process can help us understand why some of these horses are like they are. And then some people, I think, feel bad because they can't change their horse's separation anxiety. And in
Mhm.
fact, it may not be the person's fault at all. If the horse is hardwired to be terrified when he finds himself alone, you may not be able to change that. You can make some headway, as you said, but you may not be able to fully change it. And as you mentioned earlier, the bigger breeders, the ones who are really in it for the money, and the high-powered people who want the expensive horses, they may never change this.
Mm.
But people who breed on a more casual level, unfortunately, tend to be influenced by that. So, oh gosh, if the big breeders are all weaning at 4 months, it must be okay. No, no, and people who breed more casually or don't feel that same economic necessity, uh, there's lots of options for people to change that, and the benefits are huge. So I do have yes. So here we are prepared to be more successful in another career in their career, um, whether that is to be a high level performance horse like the one you're riding, or a somebody who babysits small children and looks out for novices.
Mhm.
I have references in the article. There were way too many references to put on this page, but I will have them in the article that will accompany, or the blog post that will accompany this program.
Yeah, we will include those in your blog. And it is cool to see the number of references because it's not a subject I bump into a lot in my, my wandering, so to speak. So it's neat to see that there is quite a bit of valid information as you've given us in this presentation about this. And certainly, my emphasis is the conditioning and sort of the physical preparation of horses. But as I keep underscoring, we can't even get to those tasks when you have a horse that's quite stressed, fearful, and limited by the activities that you can do because of a deeply embedded fearfulness. I was recently writing a conditioning plan for a woman. She's doing a great job, but some of the activities did involve getting outside of her. She has a small arena, and I didn't want her making a lot of tight turns on the horse. It's, just getting over a lameness issue. But for her to get on a straight line, she has to kind of ride away from her barn a little bit, not real far, but it does become a little bit of a dangerous situation. After there's like a bubble, the horse gets a couple hundred meters away and then it just slides off the rails, so to speak. And it limits how we're able to help that horse find soundness because of this sort of herd issue and or whatever we want to call it, detachment. So very
Yes.
important topic, and I appreciate you shedding light on this, Lynn.